Manchester's woeful failure to protect its young, like 15-year-old Victoria. A report out today says that police knew that grooming gangs were operating 17 years ago and failed to investigate properly.
They're not sorry. They know what happened. How can they be sorry? No, they're not sorry.
Good evening. The report initiated by Manchester City Mayor reveals that police knew that predominantly Asian grooming gangs were operating in the city, but they were told to find other ethnicities to investigate. The scandal dates back to 2003, and police identified nearly 100 suspects, and there were dozens of victims. But the operation was closed down prematurely as resources were moved elsewhere. Tonight, after similar grooming scandals in at least half a dozen major towns and cities across the country, how safe are Britain's most vulnerable children? Today's report into grooming gangs in Manchester concludes that police and social services failed to protect dozens of children and did not pursue prosecutions, despite victims giving them names and addresses of abusers. Tonight, Dave Thompson, who is the current Chief Constable of West Midlands Police, has confirmed to this programme that he is one of the officers identified in the report, but he strongly denies being the officer who shut down the investigation. He says the decision to stop the operation was not made by him and that he would not have closed an investigation like this. Our North of England correspondent Claire Fallon is in Manchester. Claire's report now.
It was called Operation Augusta, an innocuous name for a police investigation that's raised many more questions than it ever answered. It began with Victoria Agolia, a child groomed and raped while in care. She'd be 32 this year. She's been dead longer than she lived.
She's died, and they will let it go. They will let it go. They're not sorry. They know what happened. How can they be sorry? No, they're not sorry. No, not really. The whole system needs to be changed.
Since her granddaughter's death, Joan has refused to accept the official version. And she's right, those meant to protect her granddaughter did know what was happening. They knew Victoria was being raped, they knew other girls in care were being raped too. But the investigation triggered by Victoria's death was closed down, its resources pulled, so the abuse carried on. Today, with the police whistleblower who exposed the failings next to her, the new official version was revealed.
Our report has established that most of the children we considered were failed by Greater Manchester Police and Manchester City Council. The authorities knew that many were being subjected to the most profound abuse and exploitation, but did not protect them. This is a depressingly familiar picture seen in many other towns and cities across the country.
Many other places and thousands more children. For years, the girls were dismissed as troublemakers. Social workers and police who spoke out were ignored. The investigation in Manchester was one of the first. Officers identified dozens of victims and close to 100 potential suspects. But then it was stopped when senior officers decided to pull all its resources.
This wasn't a mistake by senior police officers. This was a deliberate closing down of a live investigation because for whatever reason they couldn't be bothered. They left those kids to their own devices. They let the men continue to abuse children. They will not have stopped. For me, there should be accountability now.
Maggie's the only person here today who's used the word cover-up. Do any of the rest of you think this is a cover-up?
When I heard Maggie say that this had been abruptly closed, I wanted to know the reason why. And that's what I asked Malcolm and Gary to find. What was the reason for this being terminated so abruptly? And the records say it was a question of resources.
Tonight there are calls for a new inquest into Victoria Agolia's death. The original verdict said there was no suggestion it should have been foreseen, even though her support workers knew a man had been injecting her with heroin. While police say there's now a new investigation.
Police, I want to apologise to all of those vulnerable children who were let down in 2004 when Greater Manchester Police did not thoroughly investigate the abhorrent offences that had been committed against them. I want to say that I'm personally disgusted that these children were not cared for and the awful abuse they suffered. I'm committed to doing all that we can to ensure that they receive the justice today that they were denied 15 years ago.
She was only a child. She lost her mother. It was her only fault. It was wrong. Everybody's been wrong. And I loved her.
Well, today, Andy Burnham, the Mayor of Greater Manchester, said that this case should have been a wake-up call, but instead the investigation was closed abruptly, and that was wrong. The report published today does not name the police officers said to have been involved in making that decision, but this evening Channel 4 News can reveal that one of those senior police officers was Dave Thompson, who is now the Chief Constable of West Midlands Police, one of the biggest police forces in the country. He has confirmed that to us this evening, but he is also distancing himself from the decision-making. In a statement, he says that he was a district commander with Greater Manchester Police at the time and not in charge of criminal investigations. He said he was never involved in the Operation Augusta investigation. He says that he acknowledges the report does identify him as having been at a meeting and having made the decision about resources, but he says that it wouldn't have been for a police officer of his role to make that kind of decision. He goes on to say that he would not have made that decision with that kind of investigation, but he also apologises because he was working for Greater Manchester Police at that point in time for failings within the investigation. So Dave Thompson, Chief Constable of West Midlands Police, confirming to us this evening that he was involved in the report that was published today highlighting failings in this case.